Hi, welcome to our December Diabetes Support Group meeting. First, we're going to start with a brief recap from last month's meeting where our speaker was Noni Strand, and she spoke on the spiritual effects of diabetes, caring for yourself and those you love. We discussed how diabetes can have emotional and spiritual effects. Diabetes can take a toll on individuals both emotionally and spiritually. And it's important to think, who are the people you can count on? And what are the activities that help you sustain during difficult times? Whether that be exercise, prayer, conversations with others, that could be family, friends, your doctor, or anyone else who helps you with your diabetes. Noni spoke about the spiritual vital signs. So those were gratitude, generosity, submission to reality, and showering the people you love with love. And we kind of discussed how the submission to reality, accepting your situation can be very empowering and help you make decisions going forward and help you manage your diabetes effectively. And then lastly, we discussed the spiritual tools and tips. This is kind of a list of things. Certainly don't have to implement everything, but just a list of tools that may be helpful in your day-to-day. So the first one was to breathe, focusing on the moment, acknowledging anxiety and fears, creating community, so kind of groups like this or finding others who you can talk with about your diabetes can be very beneficial, practicing kindness, exercise, making art or being creative, prayer, and lastly, practicing hope. These can all be beneficial tools and tips to implement, like I said, and can really help with the stress or other things surrounding diabetes. And then next, we wanted just to remind you to get your annual flu shot. It's certainly not too late, and if you haven't got your flu shot yet, make sure and do that. And with that, I'm going to introduce this evening's speaker. It is Ethan Leiker. He's a PGY1 pharmacy resident here. He completed his pharmacy education at the University of Kansas School of Pharmacy, and I will let him come up and talk about this evening's presentation.
So for this evening's talk, I'm going to talk about medications that we use in diabetes. First off, I want to go through some of the background of kind of how diabetes works, how it develops. That way we can better understand how these medications help improve our blood glucose levels and reduce some of the risks that come with diabetes. And then I'll talk about metformin, the sulfonylurea drug class, a medication class called the SGLT2 Inhibitors, the glucagon-like peptide 1 receptor agonists, the DPP4 inhibitors, and insulin. So here's our background. You guys are going to be seeing this graphic throughout the presentation, so I kind of want to orient you to it and kind of familiarize you with the different parts of it. So up here in the top right corner, we have the mouth. This is where the breakdown of food begins through the process of chewing and just enjoying the food. As the food moves through our body, we reach the stomach where food is further broken down so it can be absorbed later on, and then absorption happens and it enters the bloodstream, which is this red outline sort of zigzag going on here. We have the pancreas down in this bottom right corner. It releases different hormones that control our blood glucose, including insulin and glucagon. Insulin helps us use our blood glucose, where glucagon helps us release it if we need more. And then finally, we have our kidneys, where we produce urine, and sometimes glucose is released in our urine, and that's a way for us to get the extra we have out of our body. So when we eat something like pizza, candy, whatever, we break it down, it ends up in our bloodstream, turning into different nutrients, including glucose. Once our body senses this glucose is coming, it needs to react and find a way to use that. So then our pancreas will release insulin. And what happens is this insulin pairs up with the glucose in our blood system, so we can use it or store it for different activities. And then, like I said, if there's excess glucose, it can be released through the kidneys. Now, we have two different types of diabetes, type 1 and type 2. In type 1 patients, what happens is the pancreas cells don't work properly, and it's not able to release enough insulin to use up this glucose appropriately, and patients end up having high blood glucose, and we all know that can cause problems. In our type 2 diabetic patients, what happens is, as so much glucose enters the system, the pancreas releases insulin, and insulin stops working as well. So it can take 2 or 3 or more insulin to kind of absorb and use up that glucose. And then eventually the pancreas has to work so hard to keep up with the body that it kind of starts to shut down. And they kind of end up in the same area where we need insulin as well as boosts to kind of deal with our glucose levels. So now we'll move on to medications and how they help with this process. So our first one is metformin. It has other names of Glumetza, Riomet, and Fortamet. Some common side effects of it are upset stomach, diarrhea, and then it can also cause gas. So we'll go back here, and these green circles I have are kind of where metformin helps, and I'll explain each of those. So I circled the stomach here because first off, metformin can kind of reduce the absorption of glucose by the body. When less glucose is absorbed, more of it is able to be released by the kidneys and released elsewhere. Metformin can also help those of us who have troubles with our insulin sensitivity, where it takes more insulin to absorb glucose. It can help make our insulin work a little bit better, that way our body has to work less hard to absorb the glucose. And then finally, metformin, our body releases glucose when we haven't eaten for a while and we need some energy. Metformin also helps kind of keep that process from going in overdrive, and it kind of helps maintain your glucose better there. Our next medication class are called the sulfonylureas. So we have glucotrol, also known as glipizide, Amaryl, which is also known as glimepiride. Then we have the two forms of glyburide, which are dibeta and glinase. Some of the common side effects of these medications are weight gain, low blood sugar, and they can also sometimes cause skin rash in patients. So how sulfonylureas work is, if our pancreas does have working cells, so it won't work in our type 1 patients and some of our later stage type 2 patients who don't have as many cells, but what it does is it helps those few cells that are left work to produce more insulin and release more insulin in the body, so we can help maintain the blood glucose levels better. And with more insulin, it also helps insulin that we inject into our bodies work, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. The next medication class are called the SGLT2 inhibitors. The different medications are Invokana, also known as canagliflozin, Farxiga, dapagliflozin, and Jardiance, which is known as empagliflozin. Some common side effects of these medications are they can cause urinary tract infections and yeast infections in the bladder. And they actually work at our kidneys. So what they do is they help our kidneys release more glucose, so there's less put back into the body, and there's less for the insulin and the pancreas to have to deal with. And this is also why it can cause those urinary tract infections and those yeast infections. And now we have the glucagon-like peptide 1 receptor agonists. So these are mostly injectable medications, and they are Trulicity, which is also known as dulaglutide, Byetta and Bydureon, which are different forms of exenatide, Saxenda and Victoza, which are different forms of liraglutide, Adalimumab, which is lixisenatide, we have Ozempic, which is semaglutide, and then Rybelsus, which is the one and newer oral option for this medication class, also known as semaglutide. Some of the common side effects with these are weight loss, nausea, vomiting, and they do cause less hunger. Often we use these medications on top of their blood glucose control to help with weight loss and kind of reduce our hunger and the inappropriate foods we eat. So here's how they work. They work in a couple of different spots. So the first one is they work in your stomach or in your body to kind of reduce the hunger you feel. So you'll eat less food, and you'll intake less glucose. They also help make insulin work better and help your pancreas respond better to glucose levels in the blood, so your body can better respond and lower your blood glucose levels. And now we have the dipeptidyl peptidase 4, or the DPP4 inhibitors. So these medications are Onglyza, which is known as saxagliptin, Januvia, which is known as sitagliptin, Tradjenta, which is linagliptin, and Nesina, which is alogliptin. The common side effects for this medication class are headache, and it can also cause sore throat in some people. So they work to kind of reduce hunger in the stomach, and they also help your pancreas work better, much like the GLP-1 receptor agonists do. And then finally, we'll talk about insulin. There are a lot of people on insulin, and there are many different types of insulin. So the first is our short-acting, which are known as Novolog or insulin aspart, Humalog, which is insulin lispro, and Apidra, which is insulin glulicine. There are different forms of human insulin. They start a little bit quicker, but they take a little bit longer to work better. And they're Novolin R and Humulin R. And then finally we have rapid insulin, which works quicker than any of the other ones. And it is Fiasp, and it's a version of insulin aspart that just works a little bit faster than the Novolog. And then we have the longer acting insulins. So there's this intermediate class, so Novolin N, Humulin N, and then there are pre-mixed insulins, which mix some of these intermediate acting insulins with those shorter acting ones on the previous page, and they come in forms of 70-30, 75-25, and 50-50 mixes. And then we have our longer acting insulins. So we have Lantus, Basaglar, and Toujeo, which are all forms of insulin glargine. We have Levemir, which is insulin detamir, and Tresiba, which is insulin degludec. And so what it is we just inject insulin into our body. The short-acting one is absorbed into the bloodstream very quickly, so it can have the quick effect for when you eat a meal. And the longer-acting ones slowly release into the bloodstream. They kind of sit in the fatty tissue in the skin and slowly release into the bloodstream, so they control you for longer, and that's why they're only used once or twice a day. And the goal here is to kind of do what our pancreas would do in a person without diabetes. So this white here is what a normal pancreas does. We have breakfast, we have lunch, we have dinner. As you can see, there are insulin spikes when we eat. That way our body can respond to the new glucose. And then there's a baseline here to respond to the glucose that is just maintained in our body. And in this first chart, we have this flat line here, which is our long-acting insulins that create our baseline. And then we use those quicker acting insulins to kind of substitute for those meals and those blood sugar raises there. When we get to the intermediate acting ones and then the mixes, they don't cover for as long. So we have to do 2 doses here to get the kind of baseline coverage. And then since breakfast and dinner can often be the biggest meals, there's usually regular either mixed in with those injections or on top of those injections to cover the glucose release from breakfast and dinner. So to wrap up this, we'd like to know some further topics you would like to discuss in our diabetes support group videos. And then if you think of any questions from today's presentation or any of the previous presentations, please let us know. And you can do that through emailing us at diabetessupportgroup@srhc.com. We would like to thank the SRHC Foundation. The foundation provides financial support for our diabetes support group meetings, and they help make all of this possible. Our next video will be sometime in February, so look for our advertisements on Facebook and on the Salina Regional Health Center website. If you would like to receive notifications about our next meeting, which will probably be in an email form, use the address below, and we'll add you to our contact list, and that is the diabetes support group at srhc.com. Thank you all for your time.